All right, so we're talking about samples and populations. And do the samples that I gather truly reflect the populations that I'm interested in studying? There's math that we use to estimate this, and we'll get to that later in the semester. Again, I'm just trying to lay some foundation for some key concepts so that when we start introducing the math that goes along with it later, you already have the framework in mind for thinking about the concepts, and you can add the math to it rather than only learning things one way and then having to totally modify that here in a few more chapters. So your population is your whole group of interest, right? And your sample is your individuals that you draw from that to represent it, that you can actually analyze. Now, sometimes we do have data on the entire population that we can compare it to, right? We have data on the average salary in the United States because the IRS keeps numbers about these things. We have data about the average number of births each year because there are organizations that keep track of babies being born, right? We have a whole system in place for this. We have data about the average gas prices across the US, right? So we do have some things that we can look at the entire population and say, oh, I have a number for that. And that's going to come in handy later because that's part of how we do some of these comparisons to see, is my sample reflective of my population? Or maybe I just want to study a really narrow population. Let's say that one of the officials at Drury came over and said, hey, we want you to do some research with all of our history majors here at Drury, right? That's the goal of the research. I can talk to every history major at Drury. I can get this entire population. This is not a problem, okay? So in that situation, I would know my entire population of interest. I wouldn't have to rely on a sample. But let's say there was a research board that wanted me to do research on history majors throughout the United States. I can't talk to every history major in the United States. I'd have to come up with a plan for taking a sample and seeing if that represented all history majors. And again, there's math to that we'll get to later. But I want you to understand that when we're talking about statistics, we have different methods for analyzing individuals compared to analyzing sample groups, compared to analyzing full populations. There's some different language that relates to each, and there's some different statistical procedures that relate to each. I also wanted to go through some of the symbols that your book uses because they do change if you're talking about sample or population. So mean is marked with either a lowercase or an uppercase m. You don't need to know the difference for the purposes of this class. Or an X with a line above it. That is the symbol for mean of a sample. If you're talking about the mean of a population, it's marked with the Greek letter mu, which looks kind of like a U with a long tail on one end. The standard deviation is abbreviated capital or lowercase sd, or just S. If you're talking about the standard deviation of an entire population, if we happen to have that number, we use the Greek letter sigma, not Simba, sigma. Your individual variables, your individual scores, right? I got a 72% on this exam. You got an 81% on this exam. That 72 and that 81, those individual scores, those are X. The number of cases that we're looking at is N. All right. There were 50 students in the class that took this test. I'm comparing that test score of 65 to 50 other students, right? So 50 would be my N. And then this uppercase sigma that looks kind of like an E with some extra points on it is your sum. You're adding things together. If I was adding all of those course scores together, I would do sigma X, the sum of X, all of those added together. These are symbols, letters that you're going to see all throughout the next few textbook chapters. So it is helpful to go ahead and memorize what they stand for. Let me know if you have any questions.